Hello and thanks for tuning in. Today I have the privilege of visiting with Mike Elster of Mercer Transitions. Do you have a plan and timeline for transitioning out of full-time clinical practice and selling the business into which you've poured so much sweat equity? We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more today. I'm Rob Hayes, patient experience architect, dental nerd, and sales guy for Patterson Dental. I've had the opportunity to work with Mike for a number of years now and have always been incredibly impressed with his degree of professionalism and commitment to the highest level of success for our clients. So Mike's an expert with over 20 years of experience in business planning, practice transitions planning, and financial planning for dentists. Mike has provided initial coaching and advice for over 2,000 dentists and practices, and he has had a phenomenally positive impact on many lives. Mike's very skilled with helping dentists obtain clarity and articulate what their vision is while showing them what changes must occur in their practice for those dreams to become a reality, as well as teaching them how to successfully transition their practice. As well as his one-on-one coaching, Mike has conducted hundreds of seminars nationwide for dentists on the subject of practice transition planning, practice enhancement, growth and development, and financial planning. Mike, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
Anything else to add that I missed from the extensive bio there?
Oh, well, not really. That's a pretty high standard. I appreciate the whoever wrote that.
Well, you're worthy of the accolades for what it's worth.
Thank you.
All right, Mike, let's dive right in. In my experience, most dentists are familiar with the concept of selling their business through, say, a practice broker. So would you give an overview of the differences between a brokered practice sale and a practice transition, and why you're an advocate of the transition?
Absolutely. Let me first say that doing a practice transition is not for everybody. There are instances, actually in a lot of cases, where the practice owner's best solution, if you will, as far as exiting out, getting out from under ownership, is just to do a straight sale, or what we affectionately call a broker deal. So the difference and the distinction is just that with a broker deal or a straight sale, the owner is just ready to move on. They are just over it. They want to get out from under ownership. They want it to happen sooner rather than later. It is by definition a transactional event. They want somebody to come in, buy the practice for a fair price, hopefully. New sheriff in town. They're riding off into the sunset, and it's over. Okay, a practice transition, as the word transition implies, is something that's more gradual. Now, it can look 1,000 different ways as far as the structuring of it, but a practice transition really is where there's an intent to transfer ownership of the practice over some period of time, using some basic, timeline and structure that makes the most sense for the owner of the practice. But it is a process occurring over anywhere between, on an accelerated basis, maybe 1 year. It can be out as many as 5 years or even longer. And it can be an associate to partnership as an incremental, partial transfer of ownership first, or it could be an associate to straight buyout. But either way, it's going to occur for a period of time. And usually the owner of the practice wants to stay present at some level in there, on a greatly reduced schedule, but they want to continue to work on the practice, a lot of times with just the best of intentions to help the new owner be successful by transferring over the goodwill, staying maybe for a year or a couple of years, or, whatever makes sense. So again, that's the most important distinction. It's not I just want to get out. It's I want to stay involved. It's going to happen over a period of time.
Got it. So see some of their favorite patients, friends and family, that sort of thing in a transitionary period. Is that kind of the idea?
Yes, and we find this to be true, especially in smaller communities, smaller towns. The doctor, is going to be staying in the community of the general area. He or she's going to be running into patients at the grocery store, the movie theater, things like that. They have a great sensitivity, quite frankly, and a loyalty to the patients, to the team, to the point where they really want to see continuity of care for the team and continuity of care, especially for those patients. And so for them, they a lot of times, emotionally speaking, the concept of doing a transition is just something that resonates for them more deeply than just having it be a transactional event. Boom, I'm out, somebody else is in. The patients are big boys and girls, so's the team, they'll figure it out from there.
Good, good. Well, you touched on it a little bit. How would a dentist know if his or her practice is well suited for a transition? What are some of the indicators?
That's a great question, and I have to tell you, there's the by the book way. So there's certain key indicators that will let a doctor know that it's really time to at least have the conversation and see what would be the appropriate timing for potentially beginning a transition. But it's not exact science because the doctor could be exhibiting symptoms where it makes sense to begin at least exploring the idea of a transition. So let me explain. So the doctor may be burning out. They might be on a burnout track. The doctor, along with that, or maybe not even on a burnout track, might be wanting to have more life balance. So you know what I'm saying. They've got, they're feeling a little bit of tension on both sides where they don't want to be an absentee dad or spouse or absentee mom or spouse or whatever. But at the same time, they know that they can't compromise the quality time that they're spending in the practice because that's their other baby. So they want more life balance. So somebody who feels that they're being burned out, they don't have as much free time as they would like to have, but they are committed to providing quality care, continually for patients. And in fact, they don't want to see the practice go into decline. They want to see it continue to grow and maybe even expand the growth of the practice. So there's the emotional aspects. What's the owner's, where's their headspace at? And then there's, I'll just call it the by the numbers. So let me just talk about the by the numbers. And this is a rule of thumb. Okay, so please, nothing's etched in stone. In other words, they don't look for. I'm going to talk about active patient base. I'm going to talk about new patient flow. But again, it's not an exact science, Rob. So, but as a rule of thumb, when a practice is approaching, solo practice, around 1,800 active patients, let's be clear of the definition. An active patient we're defining as somebody who's been in the dental practice for care of any kind in the past 1.5 years. So it's an 18-month active patient base. What's that number? If it's around 1,800, combined with new patient flow around the mid-teens. So if we're seeing like 1,800 active patients, that's a legit number, and we're seeing around 15 to 20 new patients a month, then in a pure number sense, that practice absolutely should begin the owner should begin exploring, the possibilities and the opportunity with the practice transition.
So they're poised for growth. They're at that threshold. They're bursting at the seams, so to speak.
Yeah, they're at the threshold where, Rob, quite frankly, they're not going to be able to take care of all the patients on a timely basis that need care. When the doctor is booked out past, they're getting to the point where they're booked out 6-7 weeks, or beyond. Okay, patients get frustrated. Right. Okay, and they might decide to go do their dentistry elsewhere. I mean, I talked to a dentist the other day who was in such a state of abundance that he had a waiting list as far as patients to see him, and patients were booked out 7-8 months in hygiene, and they were upset because, God bless them, they had a high dental IQ. They knew that to be compliant, they should be in there at least every 6 months, and they couldn't. So that's an example of a practice that is like overdue. Yeah. In retrospect, that doctor really should have considered starting the process, months, if not in fact a few years ago.
Right. So there's a situation like that where there's some key indicators that the practice is poised for growth. They're busting at the seams. They can't get patients in a timely fashion. In an alternate scenario, perhaps, where a doctor is just perhaps nearing the end of their clinical career and anticipating selling the practice and moving on, what does a good timeline look like for that? When should they start thinking about a transition?
Good question, because we don't want to disqualify practices that aren't as I just described it. So for example, let's take that older doctor now, and he or she is saying, there's a timeline. It's less than 5 years, or it's 3 years, or whatever, and I want to start weaning back, and I'd like to be completely out and fill in the blank. 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Let's call it single digits, a relatively short period of time. And they might not be experiencing as much abundance with the new patient flow and the active patient base that I described. However, they could be in a place financially where they can cut back substantially on their schedule. You follow me? Mm-hmm. Because they're living well within their means, they're in a very healthy place financially. They could cut back substantially on their schedule, making enough room, so to speak, to onboard an associate doctor and giving that doctor plenty of time, literally, to be ideally successful and to launch powerfully. And they could transition the practice, still transition the practice without that level of abundance of active patients and new patient flow. That might look more like an associate to buyout track as opposed to an associate with an incremental step of a buy-in, because the doctor you're describing has a shorter period of time.
Got it. So it's never really too early to start to think about and have some conversations around this.
That's a great point. Thank you. When I do lecture on this topic, I tell the audience all the time, even if you're 10 to 12 years out, it's not premature to at least, begin having the conversation. Even if you're 10 to 12 years out, there's no such thing as really, at least being willing to have the conversation.
Right. Good. So can you maybe touch a little bit on how that process then works in those two scenarios? Let's say there is an associate in the practice and there's some ownership opportunity and a slow transition for the current owner doctor, and then maybe walk through the process in another alternative situation where there is no associate in the practice, but doctor knows there's some runway, they have some time to plan. How do we identify an associate and pair those two up for a happy marriage, so to speak, and move on from there? How does that workflow work?
Let's just talk for a minute about the first scenario. So we're introduced to a practice where there's already two doctors working together, and so and presumably it's a good, healthy relationship. That's why they're being introduced. They're kind of going, wait, this is too magical. This is too positive for us, either one of us or both of us, to unwittingly screw this up. So let's make sure that we, have professional support and facilitation and dual representation, and that this is done in a win-win spirit. And so, that's typically when an introduction would be made to us. So that's, the two doctors have been together for a while, and they're both very positive about the relationship, and they're wanting to begin the formal process of a transition. One of the first things we're going to look at is, is it a handshake deal? Is it just a verbal, like, hey, I like you, you like me, come in and we'll see how it goes? And then time flies, Rob, and we're having fun. Next thing you know, they've been together for a year or longer. They love each other, but there's nothing even formally in place regarding their relationship. There's no employment agreement or independent, contractors agreement or whatever. So that's one of the first things we're going to look at. Is that in place? If it isn't, okay, then we need to make sure that that's an important, overdue deliverable. Right. The next thing is we're going to work with the owner of the practice so that we can take their vision. We're going to help them with vision casting so that they can take out of the ethereal, the ebb and flow of what they've thought about over time, and make that concrete. Actually create a document called a vision statement, so that's very clear to both parties. Here's the intent. It's not a legal document. It's written in layperson's terms, and it basically, makes it transparent as far as the owner's, vision of the direction that they want to see things go. At the point when both parties are saying, let's begin the formal process of a transition, we have to do a fair market valuation. The layperson calls that a practice appraisal. That work needs to be done right away, because one of the reasons that blows associates out, understandably, is a working relationship 3, 4, or 5 years, Rob, and then the owner says, hey kid, you want to buy in now, or do you want to buy me out? Well, what are we talking about? And now finally numbers are mentioned for the first time. The owner gets an appraisal done, says, here's the number, buy me out, here's the number, buy in, and wonders why they get, told off, basically. And they lose the associate because the associate said, great, okay, you're asking me to pay twice because I've been in here for a number of years. I contributed at some level of value to practice. So we want to value it relatively early on in the relationship. And basically it becomes a sweat equity game. So basically if it's a buy-in, then the buy-in is going to occur over some period of time. It might be a 1-year buy-in from the time when they're ready to start the transition process. It could be 2 years. It could be out to 3, 4, 5 years. So, getting the valuation or the appraisal done of the practice, locking that price in relatively early on in the relationship is important. We also want to, work with both parties to make sure that they're talking together on a regular basis. We're proactive about that. We don't feel that any more than 3 months should be going by where all parties aren't sitting at the table, looking back on the previous, 90-day period, then looking forward as far as things that they need to be focusing on. No such thing as over communicating through these, the early formative, stages of the relationship.
Right.
And, and what's also important at that stage when they're ready to move forward is to protect the owner, and also, quite frankly, to make things financially easier on the associate when it comes time to buy in. We have them establish an escrow account. And basically the account's in both parties' names. There's going to be a percentage of the income that the associate is earning from that practice that gets automatically deposited in the escrow account. How that helps the associate is it makes them more bankable, because they're typically coming out of school with a boatload of debt, and they're looking at hundreds of thousands or more, even if they're only buying half. So to the Wells Fargos and the B of A's of the world and so forth, it makes them very bankable, because what they see is they see a practice typically that's growing. Right. They see an associate doctor's income is growing, and they see that associate doctor has earnest money to apply, towards towards buying into the practice. So they can always put more into that escrow account if they want. Now let's flip that. Well, what's the benefit to the owner? Well, the benefit to the owner is life doesn't have any guarantees. So what if the associate doctor decides to bolt, right? And so the owner can never make up for that lost time, but there's going to be a financial price to pay for pulling the rug out from under the owner. And that's all worked out in the agreements up front. It's all transparent. Nobody's blindsided by any of this, but the owner is protected, at least financially to some degree, by money that would stay with them. It's in that escrow account. Okay, if the associate decides that, never mind, I really don't want to move forward with it. So, the skin in the game is important, because otherwise it's just an interesting conversation, right?
Yeah. Well, I really like the idea of the agreed upon vision statement. I think that gives everybody a North Star to sort of guide the process and keep everybody on the same page. So I like that.
And that happens now. That even happens before they agree to begin the formal process of the transition, because the owner is sharing his or her vision, and basically the associate, it resonates for them or it doesn't. If it resonates, that's kind of what locks them in emotionally, and it gets them in that transition mindset. It gets them jacked up and excited. What happens in the formal process of the transition is we then take it to another degree. It's called a letter of intent. That too is not a legal document, but that starts to get now into the nuts and bolts. Both parties have said we want to go through this, begin this formal process. So the letter of intent lays everything out step by step, stage by stage, responsibilities of both parties, accountability, and all that stuff, so that there's, you've heard the saying, frustration is born from, unmet expectations, and, the word assume, and people make dangerous assumptions that this stuff isn't clearly in writing. And I'm not talking about, the heretofore notwithstanding legal documents where you have to hire a band of attorneys to decipher it or interpret it. It's all written out in layperson's terms, because all the legal agreements, as far as the buy-in or the buy-sell agreement and all that stuff that needs to happen to make everything legal and formal, at the end of the transition process, that'll come in due time.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. So you talked a little bit about the situation in which there's an associate doctor already in the practice. What does it look like when there is no associate in the practice currently, but we have some runway to try and do some proper planning?
Those are my favorite, because I share this with dentists all the time. You had asked, well, what's an optimal timeline to start considering? And I was sharing with you that it's never too early. Even if you're as much as 10, 12, 15 years out, because if the doctor is introduced to the concept, okay, they can get in what we call a transition mindset. And they may not have anybody on the radar screen, but there's work to be done before they go out there to the market to basically let the market know that, that they're looking for somebody.
Right.
And so this way, the owner doesn't have to be rushed. They don't have to, basically reverse field and scramble to take care of stuff that in retrospect should have been done months, if not years ago. It can all be done in a very methodical, preparation stage and all that, and then that way they're not having to backpedal on anything, because they've already got their strategic business plan in place. They're already clear. Their vision casting work has been done. Their vision statement is out there, and now they're prepared to start interviewing. For the type to look for the type of person they want. We'll help with associate search and placement.
Okay.
We have robust capabilities in that regard. We have a site called transdent.com that has placed over 500 associate dentists and practices across the country over the last 6 years or so. We can't guarantee placement, so that's where the doctors would rely on resources like yourself and your networking capabilities in your local market there to potentially help the doctor find the right person to begin a relationship with.
Good. Well, good. You touched on something I think that's really interesting, that's worthy of taking a little deeper dive, and with respect to practice valuation. So, in a traditional practice sale, a broker will determine a value for the practice, and they'll look at active patient base, accounts receivable, equipment, technology, so on and so forth, and then they'll take a fee as a percentage of that final sale price. But in a transition scenario, you mentioned that a practice is really, quite frankly, likely to grow by adding an associate and potential buyer into the practice. So how specifically does that impact the practice valuation and ultimate sale price? I know they've got their escrow account that I think is a really valuable tool for both buyer and seller. But how does that valuation work, and where does that happen in the process?
Gotcha. So in a traditional straight sale or a broker deal, basically what the owner has done is they've chosen to wait until the very, very end of their career before tapping into whatever equity value might still be there. Okay, so let's just start there. In comparison with a transition, where with a practice transition, an owner can start pulling what would otherwise be trapped equity in their practice out earlier. And they're not limited to just doing a transition once. They could do it again and again, depending on what stage of their career they start. We have clients in their mid-30s, God bless them, who happen to be in a great location, happen to really be good at building and growing their practice, and they're saturated. I'm thinking of a practice up in Oregon where I don't think the dentist is even 35 years old, has 5 kids, can't keep the front door on its hinges, seeing like 50 new patients a month. I mean, wow. It's just absolutely insane. 10 days a week of hygiene, 1 doctor. Are you kidding me? Wow. And the team is worried that they're going to come in one day and just see like a pile of ashes there because he's just going to implode. So there's no age qualifier from a standpoint of, you have to be age qualified to do a transition. It's not quote unquote just for the old guys or the old doctors. So a transition can be done multiple times, and you're really talking financially about pulling what would otherwise be trapped equity, out of the practice if you wanted to wait until the very end. So let's take a practice that's let's just say the practice is doing around $800,000 a year. Okay, and the doctor's begun a transition, and it's structured, appropriately, and part of that structure is the associate having the incentive to help build and grow the practice. Okay, and typically, I mean, we see, depending on the length of the transition period to buy-in, the longer the transition period to buy-in, then the more opportunity the practice has to grow, right? Mm-hmm. But in our typical deals over the years, it's been somewhere between a 3 to 4 year or a 3 to 5 year process to buying in to have the ownership stake. And on a 3 to 5 year transition, it's very common that we see practices grow 25, 30%. A lot of times we'll see them go up even 50% or more. So let's say that $800,000 practice, and I'm just making up a number. This is not people listening and watching. This is not how practices are valued. But let's just say that $800,000 practice, had a value established of $500. Okay, and let's say that we flash forward. It's now 4 years later into the transition process. The practice hasn't stagnated because you got 2 people working together as a unified front in an alignment, growing the practice together. Right. So that $800,000 practice is doing $1.2 million, for example. It's not worth. Oh, and by the way, when that associate doctor is buying in that example, they're handing a check over to the owner. right, for $250,000. You know, half the $500,000 value, but now the practice is doing $1.2 million, say, from 800, and it's worth now 700 to 750. Okay, well, the minute that the associate hands the check for 250 over to their new partner, look at the return on investment or the equity value they have in the business that they're now a part of. Because half of that, say 700,000 is 350, they hand it over a check for 250, boom, $100,000 worth of built-in equity value. Well, what about the owner? They still own half a practice. They got handed a check for $250,000 to start to take some of that equity value off the table, you know, earlier on in their career, and but the practice is worth 350, the half that they still own. So now it's 250 plus 350, and who's to say it's not going to continue to grow? Because now these guys are working in harmony, in an alignment as partners. So probably a long-winded answer to your question there, but
well, no, it's really good, and it begs then the next question about, you know, then we bring in a third associate, and the practice at that point is valued at 1.2 million, and at their buyout level, now we're looking at a, you know, what X percentage buy-in of that, which then benefits, you know, both of the other owner doctors. So no, I can see where it would be a positive snowball.
Yeah, and that's to our point before, where there's no age qualifier for when a transition could appropriately begin, and there's no limit. In other words, it doesn't just have to be a one and done type of transition. The practice continues to grow, and both doctors are happy with their schedules. They may choose as partners to bring in a third dentist, and the original owner can sell half the remaining half. They could do that 2-3 times. We have several clients over the years that have transitioned multiple times. And then at the very end, let's not forget, they can always engage in what we call the grand dentist or the grandfather clause, which is that if they're still passionate about their craft and they would like to continue doing dentistry, it might not be a financial need to do that from an earned income standpoint. They could be economically free, but maybe from an emotional standpoint, you know, and a quality of life standpoint, they want to stay wet-fingered at some level. And it's really in the new owner or owner's best interest to retain them on. They'll be at a greatly reduced schedule, but once good old Bill or Mary or whatever is gone, I mean, patients, you know, sometimes choose that as their transition to go into another practice. So it can help with patient retention, and everybody, you know, it's a win-win in that regard if the original owner chooses to trigger that clause.
Yeah. Do you have a percentage of patient attrition that you see in a traditional transactional brokered deal? I mean, I would assume it was 20% plus, right?
Yeah, it's yes, at least. And you know what the shame of it is that, oh, how do I say this delicately? You know how brokerage works, right? Right. It's a commissionable transactional event, and that's okay. Everybody needs to make a living. You know, it's the standard market rates on commissions nationally is about 10% a year. Market's starting to soften in certain areas where everything's negotiable. Maybe it's, you know, 9% or 8% or whatever. But the point is that unfortunately there lacks full disclosure for potential buyers. Buyers don't learn in school, okay, and there are very few opportunities to learn, and certainly typically wouldn't learn from brokers that there is an attrition rate that they have to consider if it's a transactional deal. Okay, new sheriff in town. The team, the patients say goodbye to the owner, okay, on Thursday, and there's a new sheriff in town on Monday, and the owner is a Where's Waldo. And so, you know, the patient attrition, we tell potential buyers almost to expect 20%. In some horrific cases, it can be a lot higher than that. Right. So, you know, a lot of times built in, even if it's just a straight sale, Rob, the owner will make themselves available to stay on. And ideally, if that's going to happen, there's going to be some overlap. It should be for a year, maybe a little bit longer, but a year allows for 2 full hygiene cycles, right? Yeah. Where the original owner and the seller can communicate verbally and powerfully to the patients and really enable and empower the new owner. And they can also do so in written form, you know, throughout that 1-year overlap period. A lot of dentists that are buying practices, unfortunately, you know, they just want to kick the old guy out. Yeah. And that could be detrimental from a standpoint of that ideal patient retention.
Well, yeah, I can certainly see that. You couple the slower transition with the grandfather clause, so to speak. You're really mitigating that attrition, and I would have to assume that patients are that much more likely to stick around because you've maintained some continuity in that relationship with the practice.
Yep.
Oh, good.
Exactly. Yeah.
What other points would you like to touch on that might help a dentist start to evaluate if they're ready? What are the questions they should be asking themselves so that they can really be prepared and make sure that when they are ready to make a change or start evaluating this, that they capture the maximum financial benefit and really, maintain the integrity of the practice?
It's a great question. There's a couple things, and I know I'm sounding a little bit like a broken record, but I would say that the most common emotion, if you will, or the most common thing shared with me, when I'm introduced to somebody when they're really in the latter stages, and they confide in me and they say, well, honestly, I want to be done in 2 years, or I want to be done in a year, I want to be done yesterday. But they really caught the transition fever. They love the concept and everything like that. And then they lament to me and they say, oh my gosh, I wish we would have been introduced 10 years ago, or fill in the blank number of years ago. So again, I know broken record, but it's never premature to at least have the conversation and to understand, all of your options.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. So that's, yeah.
Good. Well, Mike, this has been really awesome, and I'm sure that folks are going to glean a lot of insights out of this. Where would you like to direct anyone to connect with you and learn a little bit more about Mercer and the services that you offer?
Well, thank you. I'm so excited. I've been professionally reborn, is what I tell people, since this really important and exciting acquisition that Patterson made, a year ago. They felt it was important to enter this space, Rob, because they know that there's an aging dental population. The average, according to studies, the average practice owner in the United States is in their early to mid-50s. So there's going to be an unprecedented level of practice movement, if you will, or transfer of ownership in some form or fashion. It's already begun. It's going to continue for the next 10 to 15 years. Patterson felt it was important to have an in-house solution, potentially for people, and that's what this division of the company is all about. So what I'm excited about for the market is that every dentist, every practice owner has the opportunity to have a complimentary, initial 1-hour phone consultation with yours truly, with me, and it's a great opportunity to brainstorm, to idea exchange, to talk about, to articulate their vision, and that sort of thing. And towards the end of that hour, if the doctor feels like it makes sense to continue the conversation, we can make arrangements to do that. There will never be a cost in this preliminary, exploratory, phase for them and learning opportunity for them. A lot of times what happens is they start asking questions about Mercer Transition specifically, and how do we do things, and how do we charge our fees and all that, and I'd be happy to give them full disclosure around all that. But there's never any obligation for them to do anything. If they come to the table with an open mind and an open heart, that's all that's really required. So they can reach me directly. My email address is Michael, Michael, Elster, Elster, at pattersondental.com. They can also contact us directly, and we have a direct toll-free number to help them get their appointment scheduled and everything. It's 1-800-444-6162.
Excellent. Well, very good. We definitely covered a lot of ground today, and hopefully got everyone in the viewing audience thinking about developing a strategy for their dental practice. So I certainly encourage everyone to connect with Mike at 1-800-444-6162 to schedule that initial hour complimentary phone consultation, and then michael.elster@pattersondental.com, and I will be sure and include links to those in the show notes. Any parting thoughts, Mike?
Not really. It's a great time. Contrary to what some would want people to believe, it's arguably the greatest time to be in dentistry from a technology standpoint. Exciting advances there. I would say one final thing. I mean, we have to talk for just a second about the elephant in the room, which is the the presence of these dental organizations, right? These dental corporations.
Right.
We just, as a parting comment, I mean, they're here. I will say to anybody, to the Chicken Littles out there, they're not going to have a stranglehold on dentistry. Patterson sees potentially that they might have, up to a 20%, presence or market share over the next 4 or 5 years. But private practices are here to stay, and there's a wonderful opportunity, for practice growth and practice enhancement and economic freedom, and providing, continual high quality care for patients, through a practice transition.
I couldn't agree more. People talk about the golden era of dentistry. I think if anything, we're now entering the platinum era of dentistry. It's really fantastic and so much fun to get to be a part of it. So, well, if you would like to review any of the topics discussed today or reference any of the available resources and links, please sneak on over to robertdavidhayes.com for the show notes from this episode. You'll also see a click to tweet link that will populate your Twitter feed with a message that you enjoyed this awesome interview with Mike Elster from Mercer. We'd be so grateful to you for helping spread the word. Please also sign up to subscribe to our email newsletter, where you will receive great content like this right in your inbox. A big thanks to Mike Elster for joining us today, and thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Mike, thanks again.
You bet, Rob. Thank you.